Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to take a look at the question of when do the Defenders shows fit within the overall MCU timeline. Now, most of my timeline videos are focusing more on the present day things like the movies and the Disney Plus shows, but I do get a lot of questions for what would a timeline look like for the Defenders or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Runaways and Cloak and Dagger, etc., etc. I can tell you, a timeline that had everything in it would look like a bowl of spaghetti. It would be very hard to follow. However, if we break it apart by grouping, so Defenders or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or Cloak and Dagger and Runaways, etc., then it's much easier to digest. So with that in mind, let's dive right in and see if we can find out about where the Defenders fit within the overall MCU timeline. Now, first, I do have to do a quick shout out. I've mentioned it many times before, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe Wiki is fantastic. The timeline page breaks it down to the day, and it has footnotes for all the different decisions that are made, so you can decide if you agree with it or not. But I love it. It's a fantastic resource. There's also a Discord for the wiki you can check out. Big thank you, Robbie. You know you're a rock star, man. And then gold star goes to Drew. Drew, I could not have done this without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so for the most part, the Defenders characters do not show up in the main MCU until we get into more present day. Obviously, Daredevil and Kingpin have been appearing all over the place, in No Way Home and in Hawkeye and in She-Hulk, etc. But before those appearances, they were pretty much separate. But that didn't mean they didn't tie into the overall MCU. So therefore, I'm going to have some of the main movies happening in the main MCU over on the left so that we can see how they relate to the Defenders timeline. All right, so where do we start with the Defenders timeline? Well, Daredevil Season 1, of course. However, it's a little tricky just to do Daredevil Season 1, so I'm going to do it with Daredevil Season 2 at the same time. Doing the pair together makes it a little easier. All right, so for Daredevil Season 1, in Episode 1, it's mentioned it's been 2 years since the Battle of New York. Karen says the last 2 years have transformed Union Allied, and Matt says, yeah, the world watched half of New York get destroyed. So like I mentioned, maybe the Netflix Defenders don't show up in the main MCU, but they sure do reference the things in the main MCU. So here they're talking about the Battle of New York, which was in May of 2012, and the fact that Daredevil Season 1 is over 2 years, a little over 2 years since then. And it's a pivotal point because Hell's Kitchen was a mess, New York was a mess, etc. And this is how the Kingpin really took advantage of the situation, illegally in most cases, to rise to power. All right, so we know that much. What else do we know? Season 1 happens prior to Age of Ultron and spring. So first of all, Age of Ultron. The showrunner and executive producer, Stephen DeKnight, on Twitter, said in a tweet that it's before Age of Ultron, which, by the way, anyone who's not used Twitter for a long time, you won't even recognize that little RT after the word before. That means retweet. Trust me, Twitter's gotten so much better. But yeah, what he's saying is that the Daredevil Season 1 is definitely before Age of Ultron. But we also know that because there was a cool promo piece. Notice it says, improving the neighborhood one block at a time, starting in spring of 2015, and there's good old Union Allied. And so that means that the season is before spring of 2015. So we're kind of placing it, a good 2 years after Avengers and before spring of 2015. Also, what do we learn about Season 2? Well, this is what really helps us also place Season 1. Season 2 is about 6 months after Season 1, according to an interview in TV Line. Also, in Fisk's notes, Kingpin's notes, we clearly see a date of October 24th. So that places Season 2 in October. And all these seasons, of course, take place over a couple months. But at least part of it is in October. And also Fisk mentions that they met, Murdoch and Kingpin, met, quote, several months ago. And this is kind of funny. Episode 13 of Season 2, notice the calendar behind Foggy. During his phone call, literally during the same phone call, it switches from September of 2015 to December of 2015. So I don't know, maybe it was a really, really long phone call, but kind of an in-universe explanation that we've kind of come up with is, it's a police station, they're really busy, they had not changed the calendar date, and then maybe they ripped too many off and advanced too far forward. But regardless, this does at least give us some idea of it's near the end of 2015. And the December is more accurate, ultimately, because the epilogue for Season 2, Episode 13, is clearly during Christmas season. Okay, so let's take all the things we learned there, and we can place Daredevil Season 1 in January to February 2015 and Season 2 in October to December 2015. Because we know Season 2 has to end in Christmas. And we saw The Notebook, obviously, which was in October. And then we know it's at least 6 months after the first season. And of course, the first season is 2 years or more after the Battle of New York, which fits. Because remember, when you say 2 years, you could mean 2 years and 5 months, 8 months, etc. We round up, we round down, etc. Okay, so let's move on to Jessica Jones, Season 1. Okay, what do we learn in that? So this one's really helpful. In Episode 1, we learn that it's been a year since Jessica saw Kilgrave, the main villain, die. And that's Trish trying to convince her, if everything's going to be okay, it's been a year, you saw him die. Well, so when did he die? Well, Reva is one of the other folks that died at the same time he died, and we do learn specifically about her date of death being January 20th of 2014. It's on one of the hospital records statements. So that is extremely helpful. If it's been a year since then we know it's in 2015, and a year since January at least a year, right? Also, Luke Cage, who makes his first appearance in Jessica's Season 1, mentions there's you, there's me, and the big green dude. Theoretically, he wouldn't be talking about the Hulk if the Hulk had left Earth, which he does in Age of Ultron, so it seems like this is also happening before Age of Ultron. So we can probably therefore place Jessica Jones in the March to April timeframe. Another reason why is because in the first few episodes, there's some snow, but in final episodes, it transitions to being warm. So it makes more sense this is happening a little bit later in the beginning of 2015. Okay. How about Luke Cage? Now, I'm going to draw an arrow or a line between Jessica Jones and Luke Cage because obviously he appeared in Jessica Jones and then he appears in his own series. I'll talk later about the fact that a lot of the supporting characters all appear in each other's shows. If I were to draw all the supporting character lines, it would be everywhere. Because one of the cool things about these shows is they're very interconnected. But anytime one of the main leads shows up in each other's show, I will draw a line like that. Okay, so how about Luke Cage? Well, Luke Cage has some really helpful references. They talk about the Knicks' 2014 to 2015 basketball season, and we know that's the season they're talking about because they mention the record is 17-65, which I don't know if you're a basketball fan or not, but that is not a good record. 17-65 is not good. And that happens to be their record in the 2014 to 2015 basketball season. So we know this is happening after basketball season in 2015. We also know Luke states he's been working at Pops, you can see his shirt there, for 5 months. Well, the reason he's now working at Pops is he used to be working at a bar in Jessica Jones' season, and that bar, well, kind of blew up, kind of got destroyed. So now it's been about 5 months, therefore, since Jessica Jones' season. We also know that Luke Cage Season 1 overlaps a bit with Daredevil Season 2, because Charlie Cox talks about how Claire Temple, who's one of the awesome characters that shows up everywhere, basically is in Luke Cage's series and then at some point shows up in his show. So pretty cool. Like they're literally happening simultaneously, parts of them. And then also, Dillard invites Ridley to the Founders Day lunch. And that's important because that is a specific date, November 30th in Harlem. So that really helps us place the show. And then, man, that dude went airborne. But a police dash cam shows us December 1st. So, again, that's really helping place the show. So if you put all that together, we saw some November dates, we saw some December dates. So November, December of 2015. This puts us, about 5 months, like he said, after Jessica Jones' season. So that works well. And it's also worth noticing that it goes from a warmer climate to a wintry climate during the show. So again, November to December of 2015 fits really well. All right, how about Iron Fist, the last of our Defenders to be introduced? Well, Punisher, sorry, buddy. Sorry, Punisher, didn't mean to leave you out. But the last of the Defenders that are going to team up, Iron Fist with his Season 1. Very helpful placement in Iron Fist. It's clearly the Chinese New Year festival that we see featured, and throughout the festival we see some monkey masks. 2016 was the year of the monkey, so that tells us the year, and then the Chinese New Year falls between January and February every year, but specifically February 8th in 2016. So, wow, they really help us place Iron Fist. So, because most of these shows, again, take place over a couple months, when you break it down, it really goes from February to March. But the key is February timeframe, so you can see where it's fitting in with the overall timeline. And then finally, everybody comes together for Defenders. It was a bummer. It wasn't as good as I wished it could have been, but still, it had some awesome scenes, and it was just so much fun to see them all together. But so when does this happen? Okay, so they give us a lot here. So Charlie Cox says it's 6 or so months between Daredevil Season 2 and Defenders in a Cineblend article. Jessica Henwick actually gives us a couple different answers. At one point in an interview, she says it's a couple months between Iron Fist Season 1 and Defenders. In another interview, she says it's a month between Iron Fist Season 1 and Defenders in Entertainment Weekly. And then actually in the Defenders show, Episode 3, Stick says that Rand, Iron Fist, has been running around off the grid for months. So, they were really clear. With Daredevil, 6 months. With Iron Fist, it was anywhere from a month to a few months to months. So not real specific, unfortunately, there. But if you put it all together, 6 months after Daredevil, and we'll go down the middle 2 months after Iron Fist, puts it nicely in May of 2016. It is worth mentioning that there is a calendar, once again in the police precinct, that shows a March of 2016 date. However, remember the other calendar, the jump from September to December? Yeah, pretty much they seem to be off continually in the police precinct. Not trying to diss on you guys, the police, anybody watching this that's with the police. Hey, you're busy, right? You're busy. You have better things to do than changing your calendar. So anyway, I just want to mention that. So in case anybody watches it after seeing this timeline, they're like, hey, this says March. That would be why. Okay, now, sorry Punisher, left you out before, the last of the characters to be introduced, the Punisher, Season 1. Okay, what do we learn here? Well, I'm trying to avoid, and I will, to best I can, I will try to avoid any spoilers for anything in case this is the first time you're trying to decide, how to watch stuff and you haven't seen any of these yet. However, it's not a big spoiler to mention that everybody thinks Matt Murdock, but Daredevil, has died after Defenders. You're going to have to learn why. You're going to have to watch it for context. But I can't not mention that because it's so important to this timeline. But I promise it's not much of a spoiler because you don't know how, you don't know why. Just trust me, a lot of people think he's dead. Okay, so in The Punisher, Season 1, Karen Page does appear, and it's pretty clear that she has gotten over his death. But she does not know whether he's alive or not. And of course, obviously, we know he's alive, right? Because there's a Daredevil Season 3. So, yeah. More importantly, Punisher and Micro have a Thanksgiving Day dinner, or at least it seems like it. It's not much of a dinner, and it may not even be on Thanksgiving, but it certainly helps place this, relatively speaking. And so then in Episode 9, it's mentioned that it's been barely a year since the city was terrorized. And of course, what's being referred to here is when the Punisher went on a tear in Daredevil Season 2, because that was where he first debuted, the Punisher. And so when you put all this together, this would, a November to December timeframe fits with the Thanksgiving dinner, remember that they had, but also is, just about a year since Daredevil Season 2 and when the Punisher appeared there. And by the way, that's why the line is coming out of Daredevil to Punisher, because Punisher premiered in Daredevil. Okay, so next we go to Jessica Jones Season 2. So this one is also very specific. The Jones family crash, which, to avoid any spoilers, I'm not going to talk any more about the specifics of why and what impact this has. But trust me, there is a very big crash, and we learn from some medical records that the date of that crash is April 13th of 2000. And then it's also mentioned repeatedly throughout the episodes that happened 17 years ago. So, you pretty much can get an April 2017 basic time frame for the episodes. Also, it's supposed to be picking up 6 months to a year since the Defenders. I love that. That's the way to get around this. More of the Marvel folks, and Nate Moore, hey, are you listening, Nate? More of the Marvel folks should give ranges like that. Like, basically, they were just punting here. 6 months to a year, I don't know, somewhere in there. But the good news is, it is 6 months to a year after the Defenders that Jessica Jones Season 2 happens. So, smart move. Very smart move. Also, later in the season, particularly Episode 4, Jessica mentions summer in New York City. It's hot, it's humid. And notice she is indeed sweating, poor thing. And it gets hot in New York. So putting all that together, 6 months after the defense, 6 months to a year after the Defenders, that fits, right? It's May to April. It also fits that it is in April of 2017, remember, because it has to be 17 years after April of 2000. And by the end of the series, or by the end of the season, rather, it is summertime. So there we go. I love how this is all fitting together so well. They really did a great job with this timeline. All right, let's go to Luke Cage. Luke Cage Season 2. Once again, they give us a lot of good hints. West Indian Day Parade is featured in one of the episodes, episode 11, and that happens around early September, at least in real life. And then also Season 2 has some references that help us place it. In particular, it references the 2016 election. They do get kind of political. I'm not going to get political. I'm just repeating what they say in it. So one of the characters on the left there says, personally, I haven't felt this weird since November 9th. You can decide what he means by that, but the real point is that was the November 9th, 2016 election, so this is happening after that. And then also, SC6 was a sports talk show, and it only ran from February 6th of 2017 to March 8th of 2018, and it's seen on a TV during the episodes. So once again, it's just really helping us place it when you put all this together, particularly the September West Indian Day Parade. You end up with an August to September of 2017. Thus, it is after the 2016 election, and it is while that SC6 show is still running on the air. So, perfectly fits out again. Then we move to Iron Fist. Now, there's a connection here because both Iron Fist and Luke Cage appear in each other's seasons. It's kind of a bummer we didn't get to see more of those two because they were just starting to team up together. It was so much fun to see them working together, just like, of course, they were in the comics as heroes for hire. All right, so for Iron Fist, a couple things. We know the Iron Fist season is after the Luke Cage season because Misty Knight's arm places it after it because she gets her robotic arm in Luke Cage's season, and there she is still wielding it in Iron Fist. Also, one of the main characters, or I guess I should say side character, but that appears in Luke Cage, nice and healthy, then appears in Iron Fist, and he's not so healthy. So they just really helped us sequence it here, that we know that Iron Fist definitely happens after Luke Cage's season. We also know that it occurs prior to Daredevil Season 3. Remember, I did say that everybody thinks Matt Murdock is dead after the Defenders series. And in particular, Danny, Iron Fist, promised Matt before, when I think they knew he wasn't going to make it, that he would take care of New York for him. He would be vigilant and take care of his city. That's important because in Iron Fist Season 2, it must be before Daredevil returns, because we all know he's not dead, right, in Season 3. So that's very important. So we can place this, therefore, in October of 2017, because that fits with all the different clues that we got. In particular, notice that it's after, or directly after, seemingly, Luke Cage's Season 2. Finally, we get to this Daredevil Season 3, which I've alluded to. Oh, one other thing, sorry. Back on Iron Fist, I will mention that there is a epilogue which happens, quote-unquote, months later. So technically, Iron Fist does happen a little bit in spring of 2018, but just FYI. All right, so Daredevil, on to Daredevil Season 3. In particular, they tell us lots of interesting things here. So now we finally get questions about, hey, Karen, what do you know about Matt Murdock and his, quote-unquote, vanishing? Because he's been gone all this time, right? Everybody thinks he's dead. She mentions it's been months. Now, she says it kind of stressed, so doesn't mean like 1 or 2 months. She means months. But we're going to see it's a lot more than I would have thought. This is the most interesting thing I learned from this timeline is, it's been months, all right. So hold on to that thought that Karen mentions it's been months since she's seen Murdock. Okay, this is also important. Fisk was, quote-unquote, wrongly convicted 2 years ago. So that basically means it's been 2 years, or a little more potentially, but 2 years since Daredevil Season 1. Okay? And then absolutely important, I mean, this just perfectly puts the series in place, is that Foggy is running for DA of New York. And the DA of New York election was on November 6th of 2017. So we actually know the day, at least, of some of these episodes. Okay, So what do we do with that? Well, we know it was in November, right? We know it's at least 2 years since Kingpin was convicted, which was in Daredevil season 1, which puts it a little over 2 years, as you can see. But then keep in mind, he was only arrested at the end of Daredevil season 1. He had to still go to trial. It was probably an easy trial because he was really guilty. But still, nonetheless, 2 years since he was wrongfully convicted. And then here's what's wild. That means it's been 1.5 years since the Defenders show. 1.5 years. Wow. Again, I don't want no spoilers. I'm just saying that when you watch Defenders and you see how it ends, and then you see how Daredevil season 3 begins, it didn't really feel like it was 1.5 years, but there's just no other way around it. It has to be 2 years from Daredevil season 1. Also, it has to happen after Luke Cage season 2, because Karen works for the Bulletin in Luke Cage season 2, and then she quits in Daredevil season 3. And of course, I mentioned earlier that Iron Fist, in his season 2, thinks Murdoch is still dead. So there's just no way around it. It has to be in that placement, but wow. That puts some real context that he was recovering from the Defenders show for quite a while. So interesting, very interesting. Okay, so then only 2 more left. We go to Punisher, season 2. And what do we learn about that? Well, at one point he's listening on the radio to the song Restless, and that was released, at least in real life, April 13th of 2018. So, that kind of puts us around an April timeframe. There's a calendar during a robbery scene that clearly matches May of 2018. And Agent Madani in episode 7 mentions that Central Park was 1 year ago, and she's referring to season 1 of Punisher. So there's a year between the 2 seasons. And then hold this in your mind because we're going to come back to this, but the epilogue is quote unquote 3 months later. So there's going to be the time frame of the main parts of the season, and then there's an epilogue. That's going to be important. So hold on to that. Okay, so where do we place this? Well, it's a year-ish, a little more than a year, but basically a year since Punisher season 1. It's in May. Remember the May calendar? That was really important. So yeah, it's got to be April to May of 2018. But here's what's interesting. I haven't talked a lot about what's happening over on the left necessarily, but notice what's happening over on the left in May of 2018. Yes, that would be the blip. So it makes sense that this would wrap up by May of 2018. But then remember what I said, there was an epilogue 3 months later. So presumably, we now know the Punisher was not blipped. That's kind of cool. I kind of like the idea of, if you think about how rough it would have been during the time of the blip. And I do a video on that, by the way. If you've never seen it, it's really interesting. But yeah, it would be nice to think that the Punisher was around keeping people in check. He'd have been really, really busy, really busy. We also believe that Daredevil was blipped and Kingpin was not, because it seems like the Kingpin was able to rise back to power again after his defeat in Daredevil season 3, due to the part that Daredevil was gone. Now, Punisher was still around, but Punisher seemed to be off doing his own thing. So anyway, some very interesting things when you start to place this in the relative timeline. All right, the very last thing is Jessica Jones, season 3, and I have Luke Cage feeding into that because Luke Cage does make an appearance in her series. And so this one's an interesting season. Season 3, episode 3, Trish mentions, I've spent the past year honing my skills. And she's referring to the fact that she really wants to be a superhero now. And Jess is trying to convince her not to. That's really the only thing that I'm going to use as a definitive placement. So let's jump back here again. So a year later would place it April to May of 2018. Now, why is that important? Well, again, we got the blip. I don't know whether Jessica was blipped. I don't know whether Luke Cage or Iron Fist was blipped. But it seems like the series wouldn't be happening during the blip. So to make it be a year and then also fit with everything else, it seems like April to May makes sense. Now, here's the thing. So during the episodes, if you go back and watch them with this timeline in mind, you're going to be scratching your head because there are some things that go with this April to May date. For example, there's an email we see at one point that says, "It's spring, make your bedroom feel like a botanical garden." Trish Walker is selling easy breezy summer tanks on TV. And she says, "We're debuting our spring summer collection." So all of those fit perfectly with the April to May timeframe. However, There are also pumpkin and skeleton decorations at one point. They're watching football at one point. And someone mentions that it's 6 months until Mother's Day. All of those things would make you think of more of a November, December timeframe. It can't be November to December because that would be during the blip. And it can't be November to December of 2017 because it needs to be a year after season 2. So, I mean, you'll see what I mean. If you watch it again with this in mind, you'll see that there are very contradictory messages given. But we're going to stick with an April to May of 2018 because it just fits. So there you go. That is the Defenders timeline. And really, for the most part, I mean, other than what I just mentioned in Jessica Jones season 3, I really think it fits well. And again, you can look over on the left and you can see where things are interweaving around, like Thor Ragnarok and Civil War and Age of Ultron. But for the most part, the biggest references to the main MCU are to the Avengers movie and some small references to Age of Ultron and the Hulk. And then, of course, the blip, which we know things had to happen for the most part before the blip. All right. I do want to mention, because I just think this is so cool, I've talked a lot about the main characters and how they interweave between each other's shows. But man, when you watch it, keep an eye out on these 10 characters. They all show up in each other's shows. They build this super cool world where you just never know who's going to show up next in somebody else's series. And of course, lower right, good old Turk, he's the only one to show up in everybody's season, at least one of their seasons. And he gets beat up by everybody. He's an informant, and he spills the beans pretty easily. Just pound on him a few times. But yeah, I just wanted to do a call out to how cool it is to see them all showing up in each other's shows. And one other thing I want to mention, I've got a new Google Sheet out on my Google Drive that has everything I've mentioned so far in any of my timeline videos. It has the Marvel movies, the Marvel TV shows, the one-shots, the Sony movies, and now the Netflix, the Fox movies of X-Men, and then now Netflix. So what's cool about this is I have it in timeline order, of course, because you know I love timeline order. And then I broke out anytime there is a post-credit scene that appears later and maybe a spoiler if you watch it early. So like, for instance, Captain America, technically speaking, the prologue and the epilogue actually happen much closer to Avengers. So I've broken it out with a separate entry there so you know where all the post-credit scenes are, that if you want to avoid them, particularly spoilers like Captain Marvel has a major spoiler, then you can do so. But this is what's really cool. If you just don't like timeline order and you really like release order, all you have to do is go up to the release order column, click next to the cell A there, and you can say sort it by release order. Because I have 2 different sequences, so you can go back and forth between timeline and release order. And then also you can filter if you go up to the filter icon, and you can choose which things you want to see. So you can say, I don't want to see the Fox movies, or I do want to see them, or I only want to see the Netflix shows, etc. So it's really cool. I mean, I love all the timeline docs that I've seen people put together, and I've used them heavily. So thank you to everybody who shared yours with me. The reason I went this route, though, is sometimes you just want to see certain things, and I wanted to make it really easy to sort and to filter as desired. And then last thing I'll mention, and I say this on every video, is we do have a Discord server where we're almost 450 people now across the globe. So there's people on all time zones. I will put a pinned comment that has both the Google Drive link and also a link to join the Discord server. Also, like this video if you don't mind. You can subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we can all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing, ever-evolving Marvel Cinematic Universe.